It's my pleasure to introduce our first speaker today, Dr. Neva Goodwin. Dr. Goodwin is co-director of the Global Development and Environment Institute at Tufts University. She earned a master's in public administration from Harvard's Kennedy School of Government and a doctorate in economics from Boston University. Dr. Goodwin's research focuses on the development of contextual economics, and her talk today will discuss why the existing economic paradigm makes it impossible to see the way forward to a better economy. Following her talk, Charles Goodford, the Director General of the International Cooperative Alliance, will provide some commentary. Thank you. Dr. Goodwin.
Now, is that on? Yes. And I think it's supposed to be in 2 languages? Yes. Good. Okay. Excellent. Well, good morning. I think this group is aware that human economies have overshot the capacity of the ecosphere to serve our demands and absorb our wastes, and that it's time to start to figure out how a non-growing, even possibly a shrinking economy can still provide human well-being while beginning to restore the health of the natural world. 20th century economic theory, what is sometimes called neoclassical economics, is not well able to conceptualize this problem, especially since it sees well-being dependent on income, income dependent on jobs, and jobs dependent on growth. I will be asking, I see that's the first slide. Well, it doesn't matter. I will be asking what changes are needed in theory for the 21st century if our understanding of economics is to assist in conceptualizing and realizing the needed changes. Let's start with what we know about prices. It's an undeniable fact that prices affect our lives in many ways. People tend to associate that fact with 2 beliefs. Prices are set by markets, and only markets should set prices. I'm going to argue that, in fact, markets don't do a very good job of setting some of the prices that are most important in our lives, and that other social forces can and should take more intentional control in some areas of price setting. This conclusion is not quite so radical as it sounds, for in reality, many prices are already set by a much more complex set of factors than just market-determined supply and demand. The reason we're not generally aware of this is that our perceptions are shaped by an economic theory that has gone too far in defining a particular kind of ideal economy, and then in setting out what it is we must and must not do or believe for this ideal to be realized, which it never is. So a part of this talk will be about the economic theory that prevents us from seeing some opportunities that are before our eyes. Since these veiled opportunities are pathways to overcoming serious problems, we also often avert our eyes from the problems, feeling that they're essentially insoluble. They're not. They have seemed so because we lack a theoretic framework that can make sense of them, and also because each one is a part of a set of problems and issues that are interconnected to an almost baffling degree. When you want to make sense of a really knotted tangle, you need to figure out which threads to pull on. I have listed here the intertwined issues I've been trying to unscramble in thinking about the new economy. And then I'll take hold of the threads that seem to me most likely to lead to constructive new ways of understanding. The first item listed is that the global economy has probably gone beyond a scale of economic activity that is ecologically sustainable, let alone beginning on the long job of restoration. This suggests the need to head for a post-growth economy, especially in the rich countries. The second point asks what kind of outputs contribute to human well-being, and how to refocus economic activity, including systems of production, towards enhancement of well-being. Then there's the relationship between technology and work. The burning questions here are, will technology raise labor productivity, and hence wages, faster than they are reduced by resource degradation and depletion? Also, will technology, in concert with a shrinking economy, reduce the number of jobs that are needed? A very critical question. Number 4 asks about the relationship between work and well-being in a reoriented post-growth economy. What, aside from a paycheck, are the values of work? Are there goals other than full employment that should be considered? What is the importance of leisure in our rethinking of work and well-being? The huge, unexpected demographic shift that is taking place is a slowing of population growth and then its reversal into population decline. This is predictable or already underway in much of the world. With all of these complex interrelations in mind, the great practical challenge for all of us is to work out the least painful, maybe even the most exciting, ways of making the transition from existing economic systems to systems that are socially and environmentally just, sustainable, and satisfying. If we do not manage to plan an orderly U-turn from our present growth dependence, the result will be ecological and therefore economic and social disaster on an almost unimaginable scale. To quote the subtitle of Peter Victor's path-breaking book on this subject, our best hope is smaller by design, not disaster. In stating this challenge, I both suggest the basic elements of the new economy. It must be both socially and environmentally just, sustainable, and satisfying. And I implicitly state why we need it, because these words do not characterize the economy we have now. For the long run, the scale of the economy is the most critical element on this list. But you can't get to the long run in one jump. To get there conceptually and practically, we have to go through some short-run issues, and I believe the most important of those are the issues around work. But these, too, have been very hard to get a grip on because of the theoretical assumptions pulling against us. Point 1 is about the assumption that we need to greatly reduce the throughput of materials and energy of the global economy, recognizing that this will probably mean a reduction in economic growth, at least as we now understand that term. I should emphasize that while the theoretic issues are relevant for the whole world, the practical conclusions and suggestions I draw will be addressed expressly to the rich countries. A cessation of economic growth, as it is now measured and understood, may be expected to come about through a combination of two principal factors. On the demand side, unless technology can provide an extraordinarily dramatic rescue operation, products and the physical inputs, including energy required to make them, will become more expensive relative to incomes from work. This would be the result of ecological constraints making themselves felt through rising resource costs or through deliberate social action. It will likely result in a decline in wages and hence ineffective household demand. On the supply side, specifically in relation to the supply of labor, in most of the world, demographic shifts will shrink the proportion of the population that is of working age relative to those who are too old or too young to work. In terms of jobs and income, there are several quite different outcomes that could be traced from the unfolding of these factors. There might be enough jobs available for all or for most of those who want them, or there might be a decreased market demand for labor, resulting in either massive unemployment or, better, job sharing. Decline in resource quality and quantity might make labor less productive, resulting in lower wages. Or technology might come to the rescue, maintaining or increasing labor productivity, and therefore not reducing labor income. In fact, I'm not very optimistic about technology rescuing productivity, but I'm going to start from a different perspective with a few remarks about the potential for a technological rescue, in terms supplied by Howard Brown, one of the most optimistic business people I know and one of the smartest. With two of his colleagues, he wrote an excellent short book called Naked Value. What he means by this term is the essence that remains in a product or service after stripping away all unneeded resources. It's the pure benefit that customers seek, without waste and without material resources that don't contribute to wealth or well-being. The reason why it's so important to concentrate on naked value is that the world is facing lower quantities and inferior quality for many essential resources. The good news from Brown is that there are technological and smart thinking solutions that will make it possible to shrink the throughput of materials and energy while improving the functionality of the total output. He cites as examples companies that are developing products that deliver light without light bulbs, portable power without batteries, warmth without thick insulation or boilers, bacteria-safe surfaces without chemicals, and clean clothes without detergents. Environmentalists such as Heinberg in his book, The End of Growth, assume that the rich world will need to greatly reduce its consumption. Brown's optimistic twist on this is that yes, we will need to reduce greatly the use of materials and energy used in production, but it will be possible to end up producing equal or better outcomes for the consumers. As for whether this means an end to economic growth as we know it, that may depend on how we measure growth. Maybe consumers will consent to spend as much on the naked value of oral hygiene without the packaging and materials now contained in toothpaste. However, if the reduction in inputs occurs faster than the rise in input costs, the net will be lowered production costs, and then market competition should bring down the price of the product. We thus have a picture that is both attractive and scary. Our economies might retain or increase their ability to produce what people want, but less money will change hands as businesses spend less on inputs and consumers spend less to get the real values they seek. The alternative is a picture that is scary but unattractive. Businesses do not manage to reorient their conception of the naked value they're selling, or do not manage to reduce sufficiently the energy and materials required to produce that value. And the shift away from growth occurs not because of human cleverness, but because of binding ecological constraints. Without trying to predict which path will be taken, I'll now turn to a consideration of the issues for economic theory that arise in contemplating the likelihood of major changes in economic system. The first challenge to the old economic theory is the question, what are the goals for the economy? The existing theory claims no overt goals, but it has implicit ones: economic growth for macroeconomics and maximization of consumption and profits for micro. The critical issue of scale is related to the essential recognition that the economy is a subsystem of human social systems, and that, in turn, is a subsystem of the ecological context. Each of these systems affect and is affected by the others. Those first 3 points have to do with how we think about the economy. The next point is about action as well as theory. It is critical at this juncture for humanity to join with nature in constraining a production that requires throughput of kinds that are ecologically damaging or that are becoming depleted. This is not a new idea. There are always supply constraints which normally feed, or supposed to, through the market, into prices. What I'm talking about is not adequately recognized, however, in 20th century economic theory. It's about constraints that are based on projections regarding limitations that will be more binding in the future than they are now. These projections are well documented in scientific literature, but they are not translating adequately into current prices. The various futures markets are either too short-sighted or not knowledgeable enough or not powerful enough to perform this translation. Therefore, a major challenge to economic theory that will emerge from this situation is the question of how to insert scientific knowledge of future constraints into short-term behavior when market-derived price signals are inadequate to do so. A proposal to set prices by something other than market mechanisms, though breathtakingly heretical in the current economic ideology, is not, of course, really new in the history of Western economics. As one example, during World War II, John Kenneth Galbraith oversaw a system of price controls designed to ensure that priority would be given to resources that were needed for the war effort. Galbraith shared with John Maynard Keynes the broad recognition that market prices can generate suboptimal results, whether in terms of a national aim such as war production, or in terms of maintaining the level of demand for output that would ensure full employment. Here's another generally taken for granted example of price setting outside of markets. Countries that decide to increase exports and decrease imports regularly use the exchange rate, that is, the international price for their currency, as a tool for persuading their citizens and people in other countries to change their buying patterns. The point of these examples is simply to say that the magic of the market is not always sufficient without strong guidance to achieve results through internally generated price signals. That observation challenges the economic theories of the 20th century, which, ignoring examples such as these, maintain a never meddle with the market ideology. If we are willing to go beyond this ideology, we will quickly discover that in fact it has masked a number of value-laden extra-market decisions about what to subsidize, how to share within society the returns from research and production, and how much power to leave in the hands of corporations. 20th century economic theory has claimed to be value-free, but as taught in universities and as used in policy making, the theory accepts the goal of efficiently deploying the available resources to achieve the most desired results. And please notice the values assumed in most desired. Most desired by whom? By the people who have the most money, because this is a system of $1, one vote, not a system of one head, one vote. I now want to talk about wages, which are a special kind of price. This topic turns out to be the essential background for understanding how an economic system that is ecologically sustainable, that is, a post-growth economy, can provide good lives for people. The conundrum that is often the stopping point for this conversation is the perceived need for economic growth in order to keep providing enough jobs. There are two essential keys to a good post-growth society. They are the matter of how work is rewarded and how children and others who cannot work are supported. Social democratic societies in Northern Europe especially provide plenty of good models for achieving the second essential. I will at this point focus on how work is rewarded. Work has three main positive functions. It provides income to the worker when the work is done as a job with a wage or a salary attached. It creates goods and services that are valuable, presumably, for those who use them. And work itself can have positive meaning for the worker. The systems characterizing modern industrialized economies are increasingly producing filth along with wealth. Some of the problems, as well as some potential solutions, can be seen in an examination of the three functions of work just listed. A major problem, as well as an opportunity, arises from the realization that the first and second functions do not necessarily go together. Work may provide income while not creating net social value, and of course, it may provide social value without generating money income. The work involved in making cigarettes or financial instruments with hidden risks are examples of work that produces things that actually harm those who use them. Products may diminish net well-being by engendering frustration and annoyance, far outweighing their utility to the user. Examples are products that are designed for obsolescence or so poorly made that early failure is likely. Aside from these examples of production bads rather than goods, there's much evidence that a rich country like the US or Canada has reached saturation in many areas of consumption. Additional purchases do not increase the well-being of the purchaser. More broadly, virtually all production has some degree of negative environmental consequence in the throughput of energy and materials. Of course, this last point does not mean that all production should be stopped, but it reinforces the idea that it's increasingly important in a time of growing resource constraint to prioritize among productive activities and find ways, whether through incentive or regulation or some other, to organize society's resources towards the most valuable outputs. For that, we need to find new ways, other than who can pay more than others, to define what it is that's of value. To get to the long-run issue of the place of the economy within the larger ecosystem, we need to address several tensions in the subject of work. Between the need for income versus the fact that many jobs are not useful to society, between work that produces relatively little but is well paid versus the need for much work that receives little or no monetary compensation. That includes the production of food as well as the caring work that is often done by women in basic health care, child care, and home activities. And there's also the tension between the work time offered by employers versus workers' preferences about how much time they work. When this picture is looked at abstractly, the logical conclusion is that it would be desirable to discover or invent some much better organization of the economy, such that all children would have the means to develop their capabilities through quality education, nutritious food, clean water, secure health care, loving care, and adequate shelter. And this would be achieved regardless of the earning capabilities of their parents. Also, all adults would have access to basic survival and security. Conditions of work would be such as to maximize the positive psychic rewards and to minimize or else to fairly share the work that's disagreeable. Incentives and rewards to work would recognize the value of work that's done as well as any disagreeable aspects. All the work that is needed would get done, and work that produces unneeded or harmful things would not get done. If the first two conditions were fulfilled, as they are now partially but insecurely through a patchwork of state and federal safety nets, public education, etc., this would reduce the pressure for jobs, 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 hence making it more possible to consider implementing condition number 3. The last two conditions are the crux of the issues that need to be addressed: getting done the needed work of society while not wasting resources or burdening the natural environment with useless production. So why is it so hard to bring all of this about? The condition that would require the most dramatic change from the economic system we now have is number 2, setting incentives and reward for work that recognize, at least much better than at present, both the social value and the intrinsic rewards or distastefulness of different kinds of work. Standard economic theory contains some realistic points about supply and demand, along with a number of extreme simplifications. It ignores other factors that play a large role in determining wages. These include power, externalities, history, and culture. I don't really think I have time to talk about those, unfortunately. I've suggested that human value should lead the way in setting important prices, using markets only as appropriate to achieve the desired valuations, while the price for scarce resources or for more or less destructive energy sources are of huge importance at this critical moment in human history. How work is organized and compensated is equally important, not least for the political reason that concern for jobs is making it difficult to face environmental realities. Moving towards some conclusion, let's imagine that by 10 years from now, economics in hand with ecology, technology, and a variety of other fields of human knowledge has progressed to a point where it's capable of identifying the types and amounts of throughput that can safely be processed given ecological constraints. This determination, of course, depends on priorities for output, as well as the technologies to be used. Out of these calculations comes a conclusion regarding how many and what kind of labor hours will be needed in the formal economy. I would hope that society would also be on the way to organize work in a way that would allow shorter week works for those who want them, an achievement that would leave more time for valuable unpaid work. Returning to an earlier slide, scenario D1 is the one I would most hope for. Similar to the picture painted by Julie Shore in her book Plenitude, it supposes that while technology has kept labor productivity high, it has also streamlined production so that it requires less material and energy as well as less labor inputs. Thus, leisure time is greatly increased. Well, those are very appealing images. How do we get there? To start with, as noted earlier, we do have relevant models to draw on of countries where sensible tax policies give governments the means to achieve the first requirement in the ideal economy, to support everyone, especially those who are unable to find work or cannot work. Any welfare state I know of still needs to give more attention to work that's not done through the formal job market. There's movement in this direction in countries where governments provide support that allow parents to care for their own children. The alternative, to pay only for daycare that permits parents to do other market work, is hugely inefficient, ignoring the tremendous value to society of good parenting. My feminist friends have a number of different points of view on this comment. There are other unpaid or volunteer activities that could add a great deal more to the quality of life if they received a little more support. All right, so other ways to change prices include taxation, subsidies, which are an existing government program that could be reformed to better align with ecological realities and human well-being, and investment is another critical area where social values need to join or sometimes even override the value of profit. There's a need to prioritize constructive investments and to attract investment funds into these areas and away from destructive activities. That would be good news for cooperative worker ownership systems, which have often faced difficulties in raising capital. I've given just a few concrete examples of where some of the knottiest problems can be solved through conscious attention to how prices are set. My examples have included implementing a more well-being-oriented welfare state, facilitating shorter work weeks, enhanced support for nonprofit organizations, shifting how taxes and subsidies are set, recognizing that investment is a public good which should prioritize sustainable well-being and restorative development, and not necessarily as a last resort, using price controls, maybe by some other name, to constrain the use of damaging or scarce resources. It becomes possible to think about these options when we recognize that prices are not set by God or by nature, they're a result of human decisions. These human decisions can be made on a strictly individual basis, in which case the results are skewed toward the decision maker with the most money and the most power, or they can be made communally. I want to finish by commenting on the concept of efficiency, which was brought up last evening by Professor Zamani. In standard economics, efficiency means that you minimize inputs for a given output or maximize output for a given input. This is a very valuable concept if you properly define the output as human well-being, present and future, in a healthy environment, and you properly define the inputs, taking account of all of them, not only the human, but the natural resources which have been properly priced at their fair and true cost. And this, I think, is the real challenge to the cooperative movement. Can it not only aim to be efficient in a way that will survive within the rest of the economy we have now, but can it redefine efficiency in these terms? Thank you.